Agenda this evening, combining last week's business meeting with tonight's work study. So,
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
a motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion of the agenda before us? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the agenda's been approved. We are to citizens' comments. We have no one in the audience, so I'll assume we don't have any comments. We have another citizen comment period at the end. We are to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve this evening's consent agenda? Oops, I think the door is locked. No
Motion
wonder.
to approve the consent agenda as presented. Second.
Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented. All in favor? I might back up here since we got some public that just walked in,
Okay.
So all in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, consent agenda is approved. We had just had our first citizen comment period, but since you just walked in, were you wanting to address the council on anything on the agenda this evening?
Yes, my name is Julie Benson.
No, step to the microphone and identify yourself. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Julie Benson. I moved here about 3 years ago from Issaquah, and so I'm from Washington State, but I had been visiting West Seattle and downtown Old Bellevue and noticed that they had been using the utility boxes for artwork, public artwork. And so I've put together a proposal for doing one of those here in Port Orchard if possible. So I appreciate you looking at that and seeing. Been working with Nick Bond. I haven't actually met him before, but there you are. He responded back to me that there's a $250 application fee.
$250.
Oh, good, okay, because I thought $250. I better do about 10 of them. It's gonna be $250, but $250 I can handle. So, so take a look at that and see if you have any questions, and appreciate you looking at it.
I did have a question.
Sure.
So first of all, I didn't know who you were.
Uh-huh.
So I'm glad that you're here tonight. And I'm wondering who chooses the art? How does the art get chosen? I saw that there was a photo in there that said Port Orchard, I think 1920. That did not look like Port Orchard to me, but I wasn't sure. Maybe there's something about it. It looked like a different city. But I'm wondering, how do you choose the art? And I've seen it, and I think it's very nice in other cities.
What I plan to do is go to the Sydney Art Museum, and they have the historical photographs there, and find out what the actual year is, and then make sure that location is Port Orchard, and use photos that they will lend to me, and they've told me that shouldn't be any problem.
So they would be all historic photos. I saw that there was a rhododendron photo as well.
Once I plan to do two sides of the box. One side would be the Port Orchard historical picture, and the other side would be a state icon. So that would be the plant of Washington State is the coastal rhododendron. So if I was going to go on to another one, I would do maybe the state bird and the state marine mammals, the orca, so have a different Port Orchard historical picture and then a different state icon.
And how long do they stay up?
It's a vinyl wrap, similar to what Bremerton does, is they'll stay up as long as they last, which is,
So
should be
last.
years.
A year or whatever, 2 years?
And
Made out of waterproof vinyl, so, it should last for quite a long time.
and I will say that WashDOT, a condition of their permit is that if it falls into disrepair, the city is responsible for removing it or replacing it.
And you're talking 2 utility boxes right now?
One right now.
One, just
to
one,
start
okay.
with. I figured, let's test that one out and see, what the response is and how it looks, and then if we want to change it, we can, and go on to another one. There's like 8 different ones that I'm considering. The first one's on Bay Street in Sydney, and the next ones that I would look at is Bethel and Lund, and then Bethel and Sedgwick would be another one that would be, very in populated areas that people see and would add to our community.
Yes. In Bremerton, actually, the Olympic College has student artwork on theirs. So I mean, it would be kind of fun to expand that maybe at some point too.
Absolutely. Yes.
I like it very much.
Okay,
I think
great.
It's very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you for providing your testimony. All right, we don't have any presentations or public hearings, so we're on to our business items. The first of which is business item A, was the adoption of an ordinance approving a contract with Washington State Department of Ecology for the Marina Pump Station Rebuild Project, CWSRF loan. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Your Honor, council members. The City of Port Orchard has successfully applied for and received a Clean Water State Revolving Fund CWSRF loan from the Department of Ecology for the Marina Pump Station Rebuild Project. The general terms are as follows: a loan amount $4.1 million, city share non-applicable because it's just a loan. Loan term is 20 years. Interest rate is 2%. Effective date is July 1st, 2018, which means we can retroactively go back and capture efforts that we've already started on this project. And then we are able to add 1 year to the expiration date, or two, to get it to 2023, May 31st, 2023. The loan, which is
That's the
a very
construction
long
period,
number.
2023.
What's that?
No, what? Never mind.
31st, 2023, is a revenue secure lien obligation of the city, payable solely from the net revenue of the city's sanitary sewer system. The Marina Pump Station engineering report was completed by BHC in September 2017 and will be utilized by RH2, who we selected late 2018, for the 30% design and permit coordination phase of the project and the pending final ad-rated design, which that says consultant to be determined. Oh, that's right. We only did the 30%. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We haven't actually selected anybody to do the final, with just the 30%, as currently funded in the 2019-2020 budget. Staff recommends that the City Council adopt an ordinance approving a contract with the State Department of Ecology, thereby accepting the CWSRF loan from the Department of Ecology for the Marina Pump Station Rebuild Project in the amount of $4.1 million.
So, Mr. Dorsey, just clarifying, so that 2023 date is how long we have to complete the construction. This is a draw period, which then, once we complete the construction and the draw period, then it amortizes over the 20 years thereafter.
Okay.
So with that, questions, or is there a motion? Councilmember Lucarelli.
I move to adopt an ordinance approving a contract with the State Department of Ecology, thereby accepting a Clean Water State Revolving Fund CWSRF loan from the Department of Ecology for the Marina Pump Station Rebuild Project in the amount of $4,100,000.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Clausen. Additional questions for Mr. Dorsey? Okay, you'd be voting on the approval alone for $4.1 million from the Department of Ecology. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. We are on to 7B, adoption of an ordinance approving a contract with the State Department of Ecology for the Port Orchard Downtown Basin Stormwater Plan. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. So, don't get these two agreement numbers mixed up. They're very similar, but one's for a grant and one's for a loan. Pursuant to the terms and conditions contained within the Washington State Department of Ecology grant agreement, the City of Port Orchard, for the City of Port Orchard's Downtown Stormwater Basin Plan. So this is just a planning effort. The City of Port Orchard has been awarded a no-match $216,840 grant. This grant funding award will be used to provide project administration, provide a data review gap analysis, provide a stormwater basin model, and develop a downtown stormwater basin plan. The effective term of the agreement is July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2021. This activity will be coordinated with the Marina Pump Station Improvement Plan and the proposed redevelopment plans of the downtown area. Staff recommends the City Council adopt an ordinance thereby authorizing the mayor to execute a contract with the State Department of Ecology in the amount of $216,840 in funding for the City of Port Orchard's downtown basin stormwater plan.
Councilmember Clausen?
Just a quick question. Typically, a grant comes with a local match. Is there any match requirement to this? Then with that, I would move to adopt an ordinance thereby authorizing the mayor to execute a contract being agreement WQC 2018-POORPW-00206 with the Washington State Department of Ecology in the amount of $216,840 in funding for the City of Port Orchard Downtown Basin Stormwater Plan. Second.
Second by Councilmember Cachardi. This is an important study, as we know, from time to time our downtown floods, and if we're gonna tear it up, this area up for the rebuild of the Marina Pump Station, we should only tear it up once. So let's solve the flooding problems that happen down there, and this grant will allow us to analyze where the water comes from and how we should be treating it and discharging it, so.
Wouldn't this help also if in fact we're able to move forward with the community center and
Yes, all of our,
All of that would
all of our
be
down,
helpful
yeah,
for a
we
lot
need
of
to,
things.
we need to plan for
Yeah.
what stormwater needs for the entire downtown. You're
We've
correct.
got 3 identified basins when we applied for this grant that we used in the previous Berger-Lewis study. That was just kind of a study that we did a couple years ago, and identified three main basins with associated upstream watersheds that we're gonna now move further along.
cool.
Motion and a second, further discussion, questions? Okay, you'll be voting on the adoption of an ordinance for a contract with the State Department of Ecology for a Port Orchard Downtown Basin Stormwater Plan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We're on to 7C, adoption of a resolution approving a contract with Robinson Noble, Inc. for the 2019 hydrogeological services and procurement procedure documentation. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you again. On January 29th, 2019, the city's Public Works Department selected 3 qualified firms from the city's current professional services roster, which is Exhibit A in the resolution attached, for the main category environmental consulting and then subcategory hydrology. Staff then scored each statement of qualification and selected Robinson Noble as being the most qualified professional services engineering firm for the project. On February 5th, 2019, the city received a fee proposal from Robinson Noble in the amount of $136,000 for the 2019 hydrogeological services as needed for the continuation of the city's water right amendments. Going down to fiscal impact, as this is a necessary task associated with the continuation of the city's water rights amendment process was unbudgeted, it is proposed that the necessary funding come from Capital Fund 413. So with that, staff recommends that the City Council adopt a resolution thereby approving a contract with Robinson Noble in the amount not to exceed $136,000 for the 2019 hydrological services and documenting professional service procurement pursuant to RCW 39.8.
Councilmember Diener.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt a resolution thereby approving a contract with Robinson Noble Incorporated in the amount not to exceed $136,000 for the 2019 hydrogeological services and documenting the professional services procurement procedures pursuant to RCW 3980.
Second by Councilmember Rosapeki. Discussion or questions? Councilmember Lucarelli?
How much is in the Water Capital Fund for 13? Do we know? Yeah.
I don't know at this moment.
I do.
Two.
We just had a finance committee meeting.
Great.
Pull it up.
Water sewer cumulative reserve,
Yep.
5.5.
5.5? Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this was a task that we were thinking was gonna happen like next year, the year after, but we need to get moving on it sooner than later.
have the need to drill a couple of wells, probably.
Yeah, I get it. Instead of a contact, though, with Robinson Noble, it's probably a contract, right? The subject?
Yes, it is a contract.
Okay.
Other questions? Comments? Okay, we'll be voting on adoption of a resolution approving a contract with Robinson Noble for hydrogeological services. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We are on to 7D, adoption of a resolution approving a contract with Transportation Solutions, Inc. for the Transportation Impact Fee Study and Traffic Model Calibration. Mr. Bond?
Yes, thank you. In 2015, the city adopted traffic impact fees and a traffic impact fee study to determine how the traffic impact fees were to be calculated. The adopted study recommended that the city council review and update the study every 3 years to ensure that the study would remain defensible. In November 2018, staff reviewed its consultant roster and prepared a request for proposals for personal services. 3 firms were selected from the roster, including Fair and Peers, Transpo Group, and Transportation Solutions, Inc. An RFP was provided to these firms on November 30th, 2018, requesting that proposals be submitted by December 17th. Only one firm, Transportation Solutions, Inc., responded. Staff reviewed their proposal and determined that they were qualified to perform the work. When negotiating the contract, city staff identified a need to also recalibrate the city's transportation model, which was previously developed by TSI. This model will provide accurate information on growth's share of impacts or of traffic impact fee project costs, and will inform city and county work on developing a South Kitsap transportation implementation strategy, as well as informing ongoing renegotiations of the development agreements with McCormick Woods. A professional services contract for updating the traffic impact fee study and to calibrate the transportation model has been prepared for this project, not to exceed $25,000. This scope includes both the traffic impact fee calculation and the study and work to calibrate the city's transportation model. The city's DCD planning department budget included $15,000 for the transportation impact fee study update and $15,000 for miscellaneous professional services. This would deplete most of the funds allocated for miscellaneous professional services in the DCD budget. Staff recommendation is to approve a contract with TSI for the transportation impact fee study update and traffic model calibration.
Councilmember Diener?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt a resolution approving a contract with Transportation Solutions Incorporated for the city's transportation impact fee rate study update and transportation model calibration.
Second?
Second, just some background. McCormick Communities is getting ready to move forward with a corridor study for Old Clifton, and we wanted to make sure that our model was current. Their study is only going to be as good as the model, and if we use outdated data on the model, we could get a flawed product. So that's why staff is recommending that we spend more. You know, what this is going to cause is we have a biennial budget amount of $30,000, and we're going to spend 25 of it. It will require us later this year, when we go to do the mid-biennial review, to most likely put some additional dollars into this category, but it's the right thing to do to make sure that we're getting, you know, an accurate picture of the traffic needs.
So question, since I wasn't here in 2015, and we said that we'd update every 3 years, is that something that happened last year, or it just kind of?
It hasn't happened.
We started the process of the consultant selection. The intent was to bring a contract for you at the end of December, but then we had a tornado, and then your planner was sick, and so here is the contract tonight.
And then Snowmageddon.
So, but I mean, it's not a hard and fix that the
No.
council said that every 3 years, and by not doing it, we weren't running afoul of anything.
Yeah, but the big benefit, we completed the Bethel corridor study, which has new cost estimates for projects, as well as we have actuals for Tremont, which of course went over budget, and so by adjusting those numbers, the amount that can be spent out of impact fee funds on those projects increases.
Other questions for Noah, or for Nick? Excuse me. Okay. With that, we'll be voting on the adoption of a resolution approving a contract with Transportation Solutions, Inc. for the Transportation Impact Fee Study and Traffic Model Calibration. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We are to 7E, approval approval to allow the placement of public art on utility equipment in the right-of-way. Mr. Bond?
Yes, so we've already had a little bit of discussion under public comments on this issue. Just to recap, we received a request from Julie Benson to install graphic wraps on some electrical traffic signal boxes located in the right-of-way. The initial proposal is to wrap the boxes at Bay Street and Sydney. Mark Dorsey and I reached out to WashDOT, and we have a preliminary approval to do this. We just wanted to get a motion from council in support of us filing the application, and there's some conditions that come along with that about us making sure that the wraps aren't overly reflective and that we remove them if they are problematic, but it's nothing that we can't handle, and I'm just excited to get a proposal like this. It's a fun thing to do, and I hope that you'll support it.
Councilmember Clausen?
Mr. Mayor, I move to authorize the placement of public art as proposed and referred or refined with the city pictures, contingent on the city obtaining a WSDOT general permit and on the adherence to any permit conditions.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Diener. Further discussion or questions? We have a little bit of a Councilmember Ashby.
Yeah, I'm not quite as supportive of it, I think, as other council members. Not that I'm not supportive of putting wraps on these because they are not particularly attractive. But my first question is, we have got public art in the past, and did we end up with a public art policy?
We wrote a public art plan for the placement of public art, just identifying possible locations, and I don't think that wrapping infrastructure was considered in that. But it was more about trying to cite sculptures than it was 2D art.
Right, and I'm wondering if we needed to, because what we have is we have an engaged citizen that wants to make the city, more attractive, and I'm supportive of that. But my question is, who gets to pick what they're wrapped in? Does the neighborhood get to have any input in this? And like Cindy, I didn't know who Julie Benson was when I read this, and I wondered if she was associated with one of the businesses at the corner of Bay and Sydney, or if she had had any conversation with the Port Orchard Bay Street Association as to what they might want to see down there. So I just kind of wanted to be clear on the approval process for whatever goes up. Does she just get to pick it and it go up? Are we going to approve it? How is that going to work? And I guess my question really was a public art policy. Do we have one? Because we have got some art in the past that we weren't quite as enthusiastic about as we were other art. So those were kind of some of my concerns. It seems like, and I'm very appreciative that she brought it forward. And she spoke this evening that it's not necessarily going to be limited to this one structure at the corner of Bay and Sydney. It may be placed throughout the city. So, how is it going to be handled? Those are my questions.
I think each of these is going to have its own application, which is going to be processed by Mr. Bond's office.
Yeah.
And
I
the
guess,
intent of the motion was what we heard here tonight, a historic Port Orchard photograph, and on the other side, something that is iconic to the state, be it a rhododendron, goldfinch, whatever.
My
So,
choice, like you're bringing up a valid point, and I have nothing to do with the businesses. I have talked to, like Kathleen Wilson and some people through the library about what would be a good ideas. And some of the artwork in Old Town Bellevue were historical, and that's kind of where I got that idea. When I discussed with the Washington State Department of Transportation and looked at all their rules, that's what I was mostly looking at to decide what to do. You can't have any advertising, they're very restrictive about that. So that's why I kind of chose the Washington State, because it has something to do with this. It's a little bit different
at the end of the day, the Department of Transportation has to approve the graphic. So they're,
But they're not
In
approving
the
it.
highway.
the highway
Or
ones.
is it the state highway?
No, just on the,
Bethel and Sedgwick is.
any, Bethel and Sedgwick is.
Yeah, but Bethel and Lund, it's not.
No, but the state highway ones, they have the final say.
They're not approving it for content, just those concerns like reflective material and those kinds of things.
Well, Beck raises a good point, because I was here when other art had been submitted and there were concerns about art. And you're doing a nice job, but we may not all agree on what is great for the public art. So we probably need a policy on this and some kind of approval. I'm not sure where that should go.
Councilmember Diener?
Did you, go ahead, Nick.
Well, I was going to suggest maybe what we ought to do, I mean, this is authorizing the application to WashDOT, so that gives us the ability to get WashDOT approvals and conditions, but maybe we should have 3 alternatives brought forward from a selection and put it on the website on a ballot or something and let citizens provide input, and I think that would give us the cover
Done
that we
things
need.
on the webpage before, and there's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Feel better about that?
Would it be possible to get a couple of alternatives to choose from?
We really appreciate the effort. This is a great idea.
Kind of are thinking, I know you brought up maybe some artwork from some of the.
Well, it, just in general, I'm just telling you what other communities have done. But, you know, just, we want to be careful that it's not objectionable to somebody, you know, all of that.
Find out afterwards.
I know, right? Yeah.
Councilmember Diener?
So I'm supportive of this. I think there are a couple of things that need to be worked out. I like the idea that there's a historic photo. I think that's a pretty cool idea. But it needs to be Port Orchard in my mind.
Yes, and I haven't lived here long enough to know. I think I got that from one of the banks had it, so it could be Bremerton, you know, I don't know.
Sure.
But it was
We
just
don't
an
want
idea,
Bremerton.
basically.
But I also thought, had we as a council talked about wraps at some point within the last year or so?
I brought it up that Bremerton was doing it.
Okay. I thought there was
And
some
an
discussion.
article in the paper when Bremerton started to do it. I think I brought it up, but.
Right, and
Maybe
if I recall, we were supportive of the idea, so I think it's worth getting behind this and seeing if this can help with the groundswell of, I think, pretty cool ideas for dressing up the community.
Councilmember Ch-
Would,
Looked into this, it was, what they're doing in Bremerton and what they're doing in other cities, they are wraps. But they are like $1,500 for each one. So, and I went to a few of the community charity groups to see if they might be interested in funding something like that, and I didn't get any response. So then I thought, well, what can I do that's less expensive? And that's where I came up with the vinyl waterproof material that you can print on. That's very low cost. You basically make it to whatever size you want to, and then you glue it onto whatever the surface is. So it's not a wrap like you've seen in some of the other situations. Could be something that's maybe portable, you know, that you could, you know, move it around. That part I haven't really figured out yet. But it is not a wrap, a permanent wrap around there. That's gonna be similar to that. But that's why the cost is so low, is because it's not that. You do a permanent wrap around there, it's, what is that, $1,500?
I too like the idea of covering the utility boxes. I do see it in Seattle. It seems to be original art that's painted on the boxes. But in general, I do like the idea. I think it's an improvement over the utility box. My concern is a little different than what I've heard, is that given it's a good idea and that's real estate that a lot of people see, I'm wondering if there should be an opportunity for people to give different ideas of what they'd like for that box. I almost wonder if we need to identify the utility boxes we have and let people know that this is an option that maybe artists could adopt, and maybe have a contest for it. So I would actually recommend that maybe there be a little more study or discussion of it before we implement something on this location.
I was support, I don't have a vote, so.
Well, to
Councilmember
me, I think
Lawson.
an important, I heard something that I hadn't realized before is my issue is going to be application and durability and vandal proof and all that. So it seems like, I mean, everybody supports doing this. What graphic goes on, obviously, we have a process to pick something. I would like to see something more permanent and durable, something that Public Works can go out and clean graffiti off of without damaging things. So I think this is almost really kind of more of a funding issue. Is do we try to identify a funding source and actually go with a higher standard? Because otherwise somebody's gonna put something on that we're gonna end up just having to take off because it's just not gonna withstand, even though it might be waterproof, it's not gonna be as durable as some of these higher quality. So that would be my bigger concern, is we wanna make sure that what gets put on is durable.
At this point in time, we don't have a funding source for it. I
Right.
think this is the best alternative we have right now, and if we like it and it turns into something we want, something more permanent, maybe we put that into the budget in a future year. Mr. Clausen?
Well, I was just wondering if maybe we're just a little bit premature with this, and that maybe what we should do, the concept is great, and I think you're hearing that we're all supportive of the concept, but now that there's some additional questions that have come up, and maybe a little bit more refinement done on it to make sure that we understand what's gonna happen and bring it back.
I would say that, go back, if I heard Nick right, all we're doing is going for the application to do this with WashDOT.
$2.50.
Yeah, I understand that, but you know what I'm saying is, so I mean, we can move forward, I believe, with the motion in support of it, and then continue to get other answers, because this is something that, you know, for one box might be worth the effort instead of having paralysis through analysis.
There's a difference between approving the concept and approving a proposal. So maybe we need to modify the motion then, if we're just approving the concept. What do you need, Nick, for the application?
Well,
We'll need the final graphic, so
Yeah.
I think, you know, obviously we haven't had a proposal. This is a continuation of our previous proposal. Nobody has proposed to do this, so doing it once as an example is a good idea, and then identifying the other locations and maybe doing a competition for future examples is a good way to go. But I think modifying the motion and allowing us to apply for this, subject to final approval of the design, which could be through a public process, would be the way to go.
With approval of the second, then I would,
Paying for the original, like I said, nobody's stepped up for the funding, so I'm just trying to get something going so that, you know, we do one and see how it looks, and see if people like it, and have other ideas about it, and then we can, you know, we wanna up the quality of it, then, you know, it's ugly now.
Yes.
I would totally agree, and that's what, you know, the concept that I heard was a historic photo and a rhododendron or something that represents the state.
Yeah.
I'm
We'll
fine
have
with
staff
that,
work-
but there are
work
some
with the
issues
applicant.
that, excuse me?
What I think we can have is the staff work with the applicant and bring back some ideas that we either approve or we put on our webpage for some sort of a public process.
Seems like a bit much for one, but I'm fine with what the council
Well,
wants.
that's what I heard from the group. Do we not?
Well, one of the things I think we need to understand a little bit better, and I think, Mark, you touched on it, is the durability of what you're proposing and
Agreed.
whether it's been tested and is something that's gonna last for hopefully at least a few years in inclement weather. And if we're looking at, you know, something that's cheaper is not always better. So I'd wanna understand more about that as well.
It's like I said, vinyl material made for outdoors and is waterproof and can be printed on.
And how is it adhered to the box?
That I haven't really figured out yet, whether it wants to be a permanent, you know, glue on there or something that is a Velcro that can be removed and moved to another area, you know, I'm open to that.
We need to figure that out.
We could make the motion subject to the approval of the Public Works Director, so that he would have the ability to be comfortable with the material and how it's gonna be applied.
I'm comfortable.
Sample, have to get a sample of it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that should be part of this
So you want to restate your motion to make sure we
Well, the
understand?
original motion was to authorize the placement based on what we heard here, or what we saw tonight, with the caveat that it is going to be historic Port Orchard photo, which Ms. Lucarelli brought up. And I would add, with the approval of the second, that the application material and process would be subject to approval by the Public Works Director and WASDOT, obviously.
And you were, Councilmember Dina, were you the second? No, it was Rosa Pepe.
Yep.
Rosa Pepe was the second. So motion maker and the second agree to that it's going to be historic photo. We're approving an application. It will be, the application submitted to the state will have a historic photo on it.
And the state flower.
Historic Port Orchard photo.
Or historic Port Orchard photo, and the state flower, the rhododendron, and that the materials and the application process still need to be approved by the city's Public Works Director. That's what I heard.
Yes.
Okay. Further questions or comments? And
I'm
then-
supportive of it if it works out more as a pilot to generate interest and constructive criticism.
Okay. And then from there, we would develop, if this works, policies and future sites and inventory of sites and what public process we want to potentially wrap to those other sites, which Mr. Bond's department will, I'm sure, run through the Land Use Committee. All right, with that, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the placement of public arts on the utility equipment in the right-of-way, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Oops. I have one opposed. Was that one?
No.
Two. Two? Okay. Motion passes 5-2.
Mr. Mayor, did we have an amended motion that needed a separate vote?
I believe Mr. Clausen just restated his vote. I didn't have an
I
amendment.
restated it and second agreed, so subject to the
I'm sure-
approval.
Clerk doesn't like that, but that's what we did.
Okay, all right.
Clarify, this is basically an experiment.
On one utility.
One, and it is to start the discussion about maybe more permanent art down the way and the process through which that art should be approved.
Yes.
Correct? Okay,
That's what
I'm
heard.
understanding.
That's what I heard also.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, because this particular box they need to pick the artwork, submit it to the state. The state has to approve it. And then if we like the process, then we'll develop something more formal. Okay. We are just,
Mr. Mayor, should we not ask the appropriate committee to maybe look at some kind of policies so that any future ones we could,
I think that's
I
appropriate.
think
have something.
that's what we heard, I thought, that land use with Mr. Bond and land use.
well, that wasn't part of the motion, that's why I just wanted to make sure that we're all in agreement that that will go on to a committee so we can come up with a policy.
Sounds good.
Perfect, okay. We are to 7F, approval of the January 22nd, 2019 council meeting minutes.
We approve the minutes as distributed.
Second.
Councilmember Lucarelli, seconded. All in favor of those minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And I have an abstention by Councilmember Cacciardi.
And I do have a Scribner's error. Under reports of council members, the second paragraph. It should be Ashby.
You have a new nickname.
You don't like your new name?
Yeah, she,
Actually,
it's kind of cute.
all right, we are to the third portion of our meeting. We're gonna have the work study now that we should have had this evening. So item 8A is a snow report. And Brandy, could you play that? Do you have an opportunity? So I got a number of comments that we maybe weren't doing enough out there in the world to help folks out. And I'm sorry, those that can't see the TV, that maybe we should have been out shoveling driveways and sidewalks. And this is Officer Bill Shibley, and this is at the residence of an elderly couple where he stopped and got his snow shovel out and actually shoveled their driveway out. So while we weren't promoting that, I know he did that more than once, and I know that I myself, one day at lunchtime, was stopped on DeKalb Street helping dig somebody out too. So it did happen out there. So I want to commend Officer Scheibele for going above and beyond, and I know virtually everybody in the city was going above and beyond there for the 8 days that we were buried in snow. So I
If
just
I'd have
asked.
known that, I would have them come out to my house and dig through that,
Say,
that
what's the
wall
number
that the
that we
county
call?
left for me to
Yeah,
dig through.
it was a random act of kindness. He was driving down the road and saw somebody in need and stopped and got his shovel out and helped him out. So we put that out on our city webpage and on city's Facebook post too. So
Doing it in full gear, too. He's doing it wearing full gear.
he is doing it wearing full gear. He is. I just asked Mr. Dorsey, it's in your packet to do, kind of an overview and, our snow map too. We have 3 priorities, and the one that's number 4 that isn't even listed is the residential streets. And so I kind of know what happened is we would get to the 1s and the 2s and start on the 3s, and then we'd get another snowstorm, and then we'd be back to the number 1s. And so, Mr. Dorsey, I don't know if you have anything to add to your report that we put in the packet. I know, just wanted everybody to know that we were, crews were working for 8 days, working 12-hour shifts, 24 hours a day. For 8 days, I saw some very tired individuals in the hallways at times, and I'm very proud of the job that they did and how hard they worked over this last event. So, Mr. Dorsey?
Well, I apologize because this was my fault. Literally a week before the event, I mentioned in the hallway that we hadn't spent any of our snow and ice funds since our 17-day stint back in 2010 or 11. So I believe my staff was accusing me of manifesting this. We did what we normally do. We do follow our snow route map, which a lot of citizens are unhappy about. But it's no different than in any other jurisdiction, state, county, or city. We all have these priorities that we try to keep open. Some of our priority 1 roads aren't even arterials. They're actually a local access, not even a collector or an minor arterial. So like McCormick Woods Drive, if you look at its federal zone classification, it's you go major arterial, minor arterial, collector, and then local access. McCormick Woods Drive is actually a non-federalized, but yet we still make that a priority 1. So we try to have a map that's fair to the general public. Unfortunately, we don't get to smaller residential subdivisions until all the priority 1, 2, and 3s are cleared. And as the mayor indicated, we applied brine, months before, which really helped when it finally started to settle down. That brine was working under and allowed us to actually remove the snow. In past years, we'd still have snow and ice out on the road because our plows can't chip it off. So the brine has been a great success. This is the 2nd largest event since I've been here in the last 11 years. We had the 17 days where we blew up one of our trucks that we are on 12s or 24s. So, the crew really worked hard, again, on those main priorities. And it wasn't until, I think, Wednesday that they were able to get on some of the residential subdivisions. And we got complaints about actually plowing streets that some people didn't want plowed. So it's kind of like you can never really win. You just have to deal with it and know that you're going to hit the streets that you can hit, and you're going to block some driveways that somebody maybe just cleared out. But we can't do driveways. We have to look at the overall city. So, like I said, we did have shifts from Friday, through the following Tuesday, and then, like I said, Wednesday the 13th, we were able to transition, get more into the residential streets, and I think we were finishing up on that Thursday. and got back down to 8-hour. Now, we haven't really assembled all the financial data yet on brine use, sand use, hours. We're capturing all that, and at some future point, I'm sure Finance Department's gonna be able to pull all that together. I know the Kitsap Sun was wanting that information on their report the other day, and we just didn't have it. So I guess with that, unless there's questions,
I'll just let you know that the sledding was exceptional on Klein. It was. Councilmember Diener.
Well, so being a guy from Alaska, I'm excited when these things happen. Not everybody else was, but I think you guys did a great job. I had some observations. One is that in driving through Tremont, you know, where there's normally 4 lanes and people should be treating those like 2 lanes, there were still people trying to treat it like it was 4 lanes. At the same time, there was a lot of pedestrian traffic in the travel lanes. And so, and not many of those people were trying to walk on the sidewalks. They were walking in the road where they could walk easier. And so my question is if we think these things are going to become more commonplace, should we invest in sidewalk clearing equipment?
well, you've asked a really, you know, that's like
The
picking a s-
sidewalk is the property owner's
That's like picking a scab.
responsibility.
So we had a lot of people that were walking in the road, like down Bay Street. I was driving through, and because you couldn't walk on the sidewalk. The problem
Yeah.
is, we're certainly not geared up financially, staff-wise, to clear sidewalks. And once we start getting into that, now we're getting into this whole who's responsible for the sidewalks issue. So I think that's a discussion for another day.
Okay. And I'm only suggesting some of the major routes where people are trying to get to grocery stores but can't drive to them, so they're walking.
Yeah, it's. Yeah.
So then I have one more, if I may. So, and this really ties into also the Tremont roundabout project, and the South Kitsap Boulevard median has gotten pretty beat up, maybe as a result of plowing.
Well,
or just
no,
over
that's been
general
that way
use.
for a couple of years. That one up by the credit union.
Well, there's tree now down in there, and
Couple
just
trees
some
that's
stuff
been
that's
knocked down.
that's
Somebody
happening.
hit a tree.
Is that gonna be cleaned up as part of the, okay.
Yeah,
Tremont.
we've basically, now that we have the new community service parks person, we're focusing on McCormick Village Park. We've got to do a lot of cleanup out there.
Yeah.
But I have asked the Public Works Department to, as we get landscaping through the corridor for the Tremont corridor, that we, you know, because, you know, the South Kitsap Boulevard at one time was really well maintained when Harrison owned it and they maintained the whole thing under one contract. When they sold it, and then you had somebody else come in, they just stopped. So we want to, I think really what I've heard from the shop is we want to just like take everything out of there, put in different types of trees and, you know, ivy took over. So we really just want to redo it. Obviously,
Does that include the curbing, though, that's gotten pretty beat up?
the curbing, we know that we're going to have to wait until the Tremont's open.
Yeah.
But no, we're going to replace the cast extruded curbing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so we're gonna clean all that up, but we can't touch it until Tremont's done
Right,
because
right.
we would have people shooting us for,
Yeah.
you know, doing construction on the detour route. So yes, it's in the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Clausen?
Yeah, just a couple comments. One, I think you guys did an outstanding job, so thank you very much. Running around thank you guys, running around the city a lot in the south end. I think they did an outstanding job. But the one observation that I've had for many years, actually, and I guess that's more of a question for us, we have a designated snow route that allows us to close Klein and Sydney. And we have signs posted along that entire route that during snow, there's no parking. And yet we have ignored it for many, many years, all the way from right over here, all the way up to probably Givens Community Center, because that's the entire snow route. So is that something that
It's in our code. I've talked to the chief about it. The chief, we'll have a new police chief soon, and I think it's.
I'm not blaming the police chief, and it's not just this year. It's been multiple times when we've had snow events that we essentially have ignored it. So I guess I'm just raising it is this something that we still think is valid? And if then we can deal with the enforcement side of it. If not, let's take the signs down because it's something.
Operationally, talking to Public Works, it's a necessity.
Okay, then let's leave it and start enforcing, because it's
No.
something that is being completely ignored and has been for a number of years.
It has been raised in other communities that have snow all the time, that, even an odd, depending on the day of the week, it'd be a tremendous educational need. You know, so those residents along there, though, a lot of them don't have any place else to park. And whether we're plowing one side on even days and the other side on odd days, whether that's viable or not, we can look into that. But what I heard from Public Works is we very much need to enforce that. And it's a challenge for them, because they're driving a great big truck shoving a bunch of snow, and cars shouldn't
Well,
be
I'm
there.
thinking of also that when vehicles are going down there, and some of them, if they lock their brakes up, it's one thing to run into the curb, it's another to run into a parked car that's
Don't-
in that area, so.
Not to prolong the conversation, but don't you suppose that some of the people that are parked along, and let's just say Kitsap, or even, because I drove the snow route the other day, but they're people who feel like they can't get their cars in their driveway now or their garages. And so they have them on the street so that they can get in and out.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
Not a good answer, it's one that we just need to
Right.
all agree on, this is the way we're gonna move forward. And
Right.
and then a new complaint that came, a number of complaints were centered around when the city closes certain streets, why we're not plowing those. I mean, to me, that's pretty obvious. I don't know how many tons a plow with sand is.
Sledding area on
but
Sydney
you-
and Klein.
But we certainly don't want to send somebody down with a snowplow down Sydney.
Yeah.
You're just asking for a momentum issue, terminate down at the library. So, you try to explain that to people, but some people aren't really satisfied with that answer. But that was it was a unique, there were a few of those, and there was a response of, well, why, or a question is, why aren't you hiring private Mr. Plow companies? And the city can't, one is these guys are all out doing work anyway. They're not licensed or bonded, a lot of them, so we can't necessarily do that either. So we can only do what we can do.
I think you guys did a great job.
Yes.
Kudos.
Councilmember Shank?
I also think Public Works did a great job, and maybe there should be a little more discussion at another time about some of these options. I like the one that we should clear the snow route, and I've thought of that. It would be nice if we had a parking lot up at Division where people could park their cars and then walk 2 blocks down back to where they live, or something like that. Because otherwise, if you're towing their car, it would be nice if we had an alternate. I also heard from people, and I didn't know how to answer it, you probably heard the same thing, that they felt that the city should have done more to rescue those that were vulnerable, handicapped, or elderly, who were stuck in their homes and not able to get to their cars and get medication. It's obviously that we could not, clear everyone's driveway or the arterials or even the green, but I did get this sense that they wanted more from us.
Yeah, well, we had lots of emails, and Cindy had like 70 phone calls at one time, and a lot of them were in that vein. And, I don't want to sound callous, but, I was snowed in for 3 days. I couldn't physically, I had 3 feet of snow. I couldn't get out. I had no power. I stocked up before the event with soup, and I brought in my camp stove because we had plenty of warning on this one. And, I told Cindy to tell people as a response is, if you live down a steep hill and a little residential road and your spouse has medical needs, well, you need to stock up on medications. You need to stock up on food. The city can't come to everybody's aid down a steep, it's physically impossible. And so I think this is I talk to my staff all the time about property responsibility versus property rights, that you have some responsibilities. I think homeowners have a responsibility to look out for themselves in advance when they know an event's coming and be a little proactive, because otherwise, to think that the city's going to come to their rescue, it isn't realistic. And I know that sounds really callous, but that's just a reality, is we don't have the staffing between the police and the public works to go in and try to bring medications to somebody. It's not in our scope.
Or prioritize.
Right, it's not, we're looking out for the city as a whole, and we would be completely inundated if we were suddenly offering a service to be providing food and water and medicines and to somebody that's, down a private road. I mean, it would just get out of control. And I know that sounds really callous, but that's,
No,
You have
it's
to
not.
identify what is the city's role.
It's interesting that there was this expectation, and on one hand, it's flattering, on another hand, it's impossible. But it's like they were expecting something, and I'm
Well-
thinking, some neighborhoods, like maybe the Tracy neighborhood, has their own little emergency neighborhood group where they go and check on people, but it's more of a private thing. And I think that's something that we need to educate people and say, maybe you want to have your own neighborhood watch or your own group.
use the right word, expectation. And I being 58 and, you kind of see jokes on Facebook. There's this shift in expectation that's, it's real. It isn't when we were kids eating dirt and riding our bikes around. It's like there's a certain expectation now, and I don't know where it's coming from, of what service should be. And it's certainly not what can be provided without having massive taxes, So, yeah, it's a problem. I think expectation is getting way out of control. So,
I think go ahead.
No, we've beat this one to death, but I'm from Wisconsin, Alaska. That wasn't even an event in Wisconsin. And people just aren't used to this here. But that wasn't really life-threatening for the most part. It was beautiful and, a little tricky for getting around. But, that really wasn't an event. I mean, the event are the tornadoes and some of the other kinds of things that really are much more serious. So it was an inconvenience more than anything, probably. But I'm just saying, Wisconsin is real different in how it handles these things.
More than anything, wanted to commend Public Works and provide a little information about what we did and
Look what you brought up.
Yeah, right, good
Thank
job.
you,
can of
Mayor.
worms.
Good job.
All right, ready to move on? So we're going to our next discussion item, which is the 2019 zoning code and zoning map update. Mr. Bond.
Yes, thank you. Tonight I'm introducing the final draft of our zoning code update, and you've seen this in bits and pieces over the past 8 or 10 months. We began the process of updating the zoning code in May of 2018, and so now we're hopefully approaching adoption of the new code. We adopted our comprehensive plan in 2016, and so we're well into the implementation phase of updating the development regulations. Up to this point, we've done the subdivision and permit processing chapter. We've done the design standards, which we hired a consultant to help us prepare, and now we're on to really the qualitative standards of our zoning code. And once this portion is complete, I think we're pretty near the end of a 5-year process of rewriting the entire city development regulations. So the ordinance that is prepared for this, you'll see a bunch of whereas statements that outline the comprehensive plan goals that are supported by the zoning code update, but I wanted to highlight a couple of goals associated with this project. We're aiming to increase housing diversity in new development, promote density to support pedestrian activity and transit, improve connectivity in Port Orchard, minimize housing cost and maximize housing options, support mixed-use development, and promote attractive pedestrian scale development downtown. There's a whole lot of other goals that are mentioned, but those are the ones I wanted to touch on. Up to this point, we've had 17 public meetings since May 1st of last year. We conducted a zoning survey online that was open for about 40 days, and we received a lot of feedback. We had visual preference surveys. We did outreach with a number of stakeholder groups, including Kitsap Home Builders, Chamber of Commerce, commercial real estate brokers, and a handful of other community groups. SEPA and Department of Commerce notification has been completed. We didn't receive any SEPA comments on this. And really, obviously we're trying to achieve the goals and policies in our comprehensive plan, but I wanted to highlight a problem that we're trying to solve, and really, I've spoke to this before, but in my going on 6 years in the city, I've observed that our existing zoning code produces two things. It produces big houses on small lots, and it produces sort of mid-rise apartments with big surface parking lots, but not a whole lot of other housing types. And so duplexes, townhomes, mixed-use buildings, We haven't seen anything like that, and I think a big reason why is that our zoning code takes the approach of looking at a number of housing units per acre, and the developers look at that number and figure out which product type is most profitable to build, and they build that. So we've seen, like I said, out at McCormick, you see a lot of 4,000 square foot houses on, 5,000 or so square foot lots. You see some smaller houses, but still large houses on small lots in places like Horseman Heights and Andazio Village. And of course, the apartments at Sydney and Sedgwick are two big apartment projects, also the Overlook Apartments, which are a little under 20 units per acre. So the draft code that we have written is considered a form-based code, and it really focuses on building types as much as it does land uses. So previously, you would look at the land use table and you would see that single-family development is allowed in a zone or it isn't allowed in a zone. Here, we actually look at the building form, and we have 17 different building types: detached houses, backyard cottages, duplex, fourplex, apartment building, townhome, live-work unit, and each of those building types has a specific standard associated with it. A fourplex, for instance, if you wanted to build that in a zone that currently allows 8 units per acre, it would take a half an acre to build a fourplex when you really only need about 7,000 square feet to build 2 units stacked on top of each other with 8 parking spaces. And so the density requirement that we had in our existing code was really out of whack with in relationship to how much land area it actually takes to build that particular building type. So owners of property or people seeking to develop property are going to have to, there's going to be a little bit of education with this, because they're going to have to say, what is my property zoned, what building types are allowed there, as well as what uses are allowed there, whereas previously we didn't really get into building types or form at all. And if you're coming to the city looking to build something, you say, well, what kind of building am I trying to build? Okay, it's a fast food restaurant. That is considered a single-story shopfront. In what zone can I operate both a restaurant and build a single-story shopfront? And so you have to look at things from a form and a use standpoint. So it's a radically new approach. We've given this to you in bits and pieces throughout the year. I think we've had this at 2 or 3 executive or work study meetings, as well as at committee meetings, trying to introduce you to these concepts. So I don't think anything here is terribly new. The way that this is presented tonight, the code is written in order that it appears in the code, so it's chronological by code section. In the final ordinance that you would see when you take action on this, the ordinance is going to adopt 5 different parts. Part 1 is going to be amendments to existing chapters. Part 2 is amendments to existing sections. Part 3 is adoption of a new zoning map, and then there's repeal of old sections and adoption of entirely new chapters that haven't previously existed. And so it's going to come to you in a little bit different order, but all of the chapters will be the same. I emailed on February 8th, everybody should have received a memo from my department. I tried to outline sort of the critical pieces of this code that I think rise to the level of potential discussion, or at least making you aware of this. I'm seeing a nod of the head.
Yeah, when was that?
February 8th,
It was in an email.
Yeah.
into the snowstorm weekend.
I don't remember seeing it.
I wanted
That
to give
doesn't mean
everybody
I
something to
didn't.
do.
Before the second storm.
Yes. In any event, I wanted to touch on a couple of the key changes to make sure that you're aware of these changes, and that if you have questions or concerns about them, they can be discussed. First of all, starting off downtown, we previously had the downtown overlay district, and that was something that we've tweaked here and there over the years. But it was an all-encompassing chapter on downtown, and there were standards that were applied based on whether property was abutting Bay Street or not abutting Bay Street, north or south of Bay Street. The gateway areas, it had street boundaries. I think Harrison to Seattle had certain restrictions. And we've really, I think it was a very confusing chapter to read for somebody trying to figure out what they can do. What we've tried to do is, concerning height, we've created a downtown height overlay district map, and we've spatially color-coded downtown based on what height is allowed where. So it's very easy to see how much height you can have on a particular property. We haven't increased heights downtown. We followed what was allowed in the previous code, with the exception that everything ends in an 8 previously. The height limits didn't say how many stories we were aiming for, and because a ground floor story is typically 10 to 15 feet, We wanted to make sure that there was plenty of room for, rooftop equipment, as well as having that slightly higher ground floor, which would typically be a retail space in downtown. So you have a 38-foot 3-story building, a 48-foot 4-story building, and a 58-foot 5-story building. And I would expect that most 5-story buildings come in a little less than 58 feet, but we cap the number of floors in addition to the physical height with a specification for how you measure that. Concerning uses, all of our downtown was previously zoned either commercial or mixed use. We've now just created in the land use table a downtown mixed use zone, a gateway mixed use zone, and those are color coded on the map so that, it's really easy to read. You don't have to look at where you are. You don't have to read the text telling you where you are on a map. You actually have just an easy to read map that tells you what uses are allowed where. All of the restrictions concerning bail bonds and tattoo parlors that we've beat up over the years remain the same. We haven't changed those items. And then moving on to the View Protection Overlay District, which mostly applies around downtown. Again, we've created a map showing what properties are in and what properties are out. The intent here was, previously we had a huge area that went all the way up past the courthouse. There were a lot of properties that didn't have views included. So we looked at the topography. Now that we have LiDAR data available to us, it's really easy for us to look at who has a view to protect and who doesn't. So we say that there's a 15-foot height limit from the uphill property elevation as opposed to measuring the average height of the site. So it's a little bit different methodology, which is consistent with our old approach. But the area has become smaller because we have taken those upland areas that don't have views out of the overlay district. We've also taken out the process that allows somebody to come to council to ask for an exception to this, because you were put in the position of making a quasi-judicial type decision, and it was one of the few quasi-judicial decisions that you had to make, and it really should be accomplished by a rezone application rather than by legislative action by council. So we made that a whole lot cleaner. If somebody wants to get out of the View Protection Overlay District, they have to apply for a rezone, and then they can be removed if they meet the criteria. And ultimately, council votes on the rezone, but after it's been to the hearing examiner, so there's a record. Next, concerning residential development, one of the big changes is that residential front yard setbacks are, first of all, we allow for averaging, and where existing houses are further back, you have to use averaging and meet the average of your two neighbors, so that we're trying to maintain existing streetscapes, but also allow new development to come closer to the street. The big benefit of a 10-foot setback versus a 15 is we're trying to de-emphasize garages, and by allowing the living space to come forward, you're disincentivizing somebody from wanting to park a car right in front of their house, and that encourages the use of alleys or different garage configurations that are more attractive. And the Planning Commission went back and forth on this, but ultimately felt that a 10-foot setback was appropriate, and provided that there was averaging in these older areas of the city. We also have adopted a new connectivity index. We require developers, when they're platting new subdivisions, to look at what we call a connectivity index. And we look at the number of nodes over the number of road segments, or and we come up with a ratio. And so if you have a 1.4 ratio, number one, you're going to have at least 2 points of entry to the development, so that it's not, if you are familiar with Andazio Village, they have one entrance in and out, and it's a big loop, but it doesn't connect through for pedestrians or for vehicles, which is a problem for fire and, as it turns out, tornado response. And it also makes it harder for pedestrians to get around and makes things less walkable. So we're trying to more scientifically create requirements for connectivity without telling people exactly how they have to connect. One of the things that we always have trouble with in approving subdivisions is unless you have a criteria in your code, it's hard to force somebody to build a connection to an adjacent property. But with a connectivity index, you're giving them the opportunity to either build two entrances or stub something off to an adjacent developable site. So the goal is to make things more connected in the city. We did include a lot of exceptions for projections into setbacks for bay windows, front porches, chimneys, and things like that, so long as the requirements of the building code are met. And we've also created a couple of new zones, including a residential mixed-use zone, which is really intended to be a transitional zone. And so if you're on the boundary of a zoning district change, you can apply to be residential mixed use, and that would allow you to do townhomes or live-work type units and sort of transition from a residential area into a commercial area. Any questions so far? I know I'm
One
getting
for
a
me,
lot of
Nick.
content
What-
out.
At the planning commission, what type of did you get any testimony? And
We
who attended?
received testimony. It was all in favor of the changes, and so we haven't received any testimony in opposition. We just had one person show up that was concerned about their particular property, and they liked what they heard and just wanted to know what was going on. And we also, as part of this, anybody that was getting a zoning change that was significant, such as going from general commercial to commercial mixed use, there was enough of a shift there that we wanted to give people a postcard notification so that they would understand. We had 3 or 4 people ask for changes. They at the corner of Silvis Lane and Bethel, there was a property there that they were going to be commercial corridor. They wanted commercial mixed use because they wanted more flexibility to do residential development than what was afforded in the commercial corridor zone. So we made that change. There was also a change at McCormick North where we proposed them to be R4. They actually requested R3 because it allowed more diversity in housing types because it's a lower rise area. So you can do houses or apartments, but they're limited to 3 stories rather than 4, and they wanted that flexibility.
Did you do anything with the business professional area?
We did. We have retained the business professional zone. We actually did a lot of research back into what was developed going back to 2009 or 2010. And the interesting thing was the development regulations that were adopted did not match the intent statements that were adopted. The intent statement clearly said that the goal was to promote mixed-use type development, but then the regulations didn't actually allow mixed-use development. And so we looked back at sort of the intent of that zone and tried to follow the narrative of what the business professional zone was about, and we reshaped that zone to allow for a variety of building types. And by introducing building types, I think we were really able to steer away from the things that the intent statement didn't want and aim towards the things that the intent statement did want, like buildings that are truly mixed use with a ground floor commercial and a residential above, as opposed to horizontally mixed use projects where you have, a single story shop front on the corner with a separate apartment building behind it. So I think we hit the mark on that, but honestly, there wasn't a ton of discussion of the business professional zone.
I personally reached out to the home builders, talked to the executive director. They have been tracking this code. Didn't have any objections to what, we've been doing to this point. Said, would like to hear you come to the meetings, and he says, we've been tracking the process, and I don't know if you made their last meeting or not.
No, they didn't have me on the agenda for that one, and I actually ended up being sick that day. So if there's no other questions, I'll jump back into the commercial.
No, Councilman
You
Dean?
can let him finish.
Okay.
Okay, so continuing with some of the changes to the commercial zone, the commercial mixed-use zone is really a departure from what we previously allowed, because the commercial zone the general commercial zone that's in our code now allows for mixed-use development with a conditional use permit. So number one, you got to go to the hearing examiner to get an approval. And number two, it's limited to 20 units per acre, and it doesn't clearly specify whether that's a mixed-use building or whether that's apartments next to commercial. And so when the Rush development went in at the corner of Sydney and Sedgwick, there's the pad that's there right now that's undeveloped with the apartments behind that. That was actually a conditional use permit for mixed-use development. So the commercial mixed-use zone allows what Rush did there, where you can have either commercial or apartments. It also allows commercial mixed use where they're combined in one building. When you get to downtown commercial, it does not allow horizontally mixed uses. They have to be combined in one building. And so it's really important to look at the building type mixed use shopfront versus single story shopfront, because not all of the commercial zones allow for single story shopfront type buildings. This code also replaces our self-storage overlay district regulations, and it's largely what we adopted as an interim regulation in terms of a map. We require a market study demonstrating that there's sufficient demand of the residents of Port Orchard for additional storage. The industry actually uses, they have a pretty standard ratio of storage square footage to population within proximity of a facility to determine whether there is a demand or not a demand for self-storage. And I think our goal with this is to make sure that we don't become the dumping ground of self-storage for the county, that if there's demand for storage in Silverdale, that it be built in Silverdale, or if there's demand in, Gig Harbor, that it be built in Gig Harbor, that we're not having people driving long distances to store things in Port Orchard. The Planning Commission also added a requirement that self-storage facilities be 2 stories. So you can't do single-story self-storage facilities now. They just built a multi-story one in Gorst. And so that does 2 things. Number one, it increases the assessed value of that structure in terms of a tax base to the city, because those facilities don't generate a lot of revenue to the city, and it uses space more efficiently. So I think those are 2 benefits of that proposed change, and we haven't had any real discussion. I think the suggestion of the market study actually came from the developer of the Bethel Heated Storage project. They said that Renton was using a similar methodology, and when we looked at it, we liked it. We're also adopting that same tool where you have to have a market study to justify the construction of a new gas station. And the reason for that is that we've had a proposal recently to build a new gas station on Sedgwick, and there's 4 gas stations in the vicinity. And I think the last thing we want is an old gas station that's not performing well to go out of business, and for there to be a vacant site with underground storage tanks that aren't being utilized. And so we want to make sure that that we're not oversupplying our city with gas stations at the expense of other uses that we need to reserve land for, and uses that are more that generate more revenue for the city. I think the other thing that's important for the council to realize about this proposed change is that this is increasing the city's capacity for growth. We do a buildable lands report every time we update our comprehensive plan, and so this is effectively increasing the amount of units of housing and not necessarily commercial space, but certainly housing that can be accommodated in the city. And so that means that in 2023 or 2024, we're essentially taking reasonable measures now that are going to add the capacity that we need for our next comprehensive plan update, which means that we're as a city, going to be unlikely to justify expansion of the urban growth area. It's unclear how this would affect the entire countywide numbers, but it does have an impact because it's increasing the residential capacity in Kitsap County.
But if I may, on that point, we might see a larger allocation proportionally than we've seen historically.
Population allocation.
Yes.
Yeah, that's also dictated by Vision 2050, which hasn't been written yet. So we're going to get, as whatever category of city we end up being, we're going to get a share, and then we have to figure out how to accommodate that. But hopefully we're getting in front of that now with this change. I'm getting near the end of the high-level changes here. There's a chapter in here on transfer of development rights. We're going to become a receiving area for development rights from Kitsap County. And Kitsap County has had a TDR program in place for a number of years, and they've got one interested development rights seller. I don't know that anybody has bought a development right yet from the county, but I think part of the reason is that they don't have great places they don't have enough of a benefit to use those development rights. And so our hope is that by allowing things to be transferred into the city and we have a map of eligible receiving areas, we're willing to give somebody a height bonus that's 5,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet, 1 story in height, for every development right purchased from the county. And 2,000 square feet is potentially enough for 3 to 4 dwelling units, so it's really a 4-to-1 ratio in terms of how we magnify the value of that development right if it were to be brought into the city. The caveat is that it has to come from one of the zip codes surrounding Port Orchard. We don't want development rights from Hansville coming into Port Orchard. We really want to preserve the rural areas surrounding Port Orchard and protect land in that way. Concerning parking, previously, for some reason, council gave me the authority without any criteria to just grant waivers from parking requirements. It said that I could reduce parking requirements up to 50% for any reason that I wanted.
Did you say 50 or 15?
50. So I could grant a 50% parking reduction. They could make that request of me, and there was no guidance for how I was to handle that. We still do allow reductions in parking, but now we require a parking study to justify that, and there's criteria. It would be processed as an administrative variance, so you have to meet the criteria of the administrative variance, as well as provide a study to justify that parking reduction, and that reduction can apply to vehicle parking, electric vehicle parking, and bicycle parking. And electric vehicle and parking and bicycle parking are new items in the code. There's a handful of uses that are going to be required to provide electric vehicle parking. Mainly, our real concern is residential apartments, because very often a residential apartment owner is not going to be willing to make the investment or potentially even allow somebody who wants an electric car to put in the infrastructure in support of that. So they can still apply for a variance from that, but our goal is to establish minimum so that at least they will put in the panel size and the conduit and the signage to allow for electric vehicle parking, and that the minimum requirements that we're adopting today will double in a few years based on our review of, we've looked at a number of market studies about the growth in the market, and we think it's important to be in front of this so that people who live in an apartment have this choice available to them. It also requires 1% of stalls in like a restaurant, a hotel, and I think there's maybe it's 3% in a hotel. You'd have to look at the parking chapter for the specifics. But in any event, that's a new requirement. Finally, the significant trees chapter, and this has been a difficult chapter, and I think we received some really positive feedback from McCormick Communities on this. They've really, and actually the home builders as well. What we've realized is that our existing code, number one, it has a lot of loopholes where you can go in pre-development and clear a site without complying with that chapter, and so we're closing loopholes that exist now that would allow somebody to remove significant trees where we don't want significant trees removed. However, the problem with our existing code, and something we've tried to address in the new code, is that if you have a forested site, like we looked at a site off of Geiger as kind of a case study for how this would work. And the tornado did take a few of the trees out there, but the site has like 400 trees on it, and it's 20 acres or so. You have to replace significant, and they're almost all significant. So you have 400 significant trees that you have to replace at a 3-to-1 ratio. You're planting trees at such a density that number one, they're not going to grow to be healthy, and there's no room left for development. So while we're following the same approach that we have historically, we're actually going to be proposing a change to this here in the coming months, and we're taking something back to Planning Commission. We've made this workable because we allow you to replace the trees off-site, and for instance, one of the developers who's looking at making an application, they own property off of Salmonberry, and so they have a small tract there that they want to plant some trees on to meet their significant tree replacement, and they're still planting like 300 trees in their site with street trees and buffer trees around the perimeter. There just isn't room for a whole lot more than that, and their requirement is more like 900 trees that they would have had to replace in the absence of these changes. So our long-term approach is we want to get to a tree canopy ratio so that the trees that are planted are going to reach a certain percentage of cover of the site 20 years down the road once those trees reach maturity, as opposed to saying that you have to cram as many trees into a site as possible. And we reduce the ratio of canopy coverage for every significant tree that you do retain to preserve that incentive. But again, that's going to come in kind of a step 2 to the significant tree chapter. We didn't want to hold up the entire zoning code for that one issue. So that's the summary of the really critical pieces of this that I think you ought to know about. You will see you didn't get a red line copy of this because your packet would have passed 1,000 pages, I think, and most of the chapters are entirely new. And if anybody has specific concerns about red line, we have red line chapters for the chapters that we're just amending. We can easily give you red lines on, but I think giving you whole, if we're repealing an entire section and adopting a new chapter, I don't feel it's helpful to provide that red line. But if you'd like it, I can get it to you between now and whenever we take action on this, which that's the big question tonight, is when will you be ready to take this forward, if you are ready to take it forward?
So maybe answer questions first and then tackle that at the end. Councilmember Diener?
Well, so he addressed the question I had about what this does for density, and I think we've got a ways away from population allocation, but I don't think any of us want Port Orchard to be a dumping ground for population. So it may be a circumstance where we have to look at pulling in some of our boundaries if it heads that way. But I guess. I don't know enough about that, and we've got some time. So thank you for addressing that. With the storage units, you said there's a minimum height of 2 stories. Is there a maximum height then that corresponds to the zone that they're in? Or
Yeah,
are
what
they-
it's the zoning height is the maximum, but there's a minimum height for that. There's no minimum height for other uses, just storage units.
Okay. I'd like to see us incentivize those things going up rather than out, even if it meant some sort of bonus. But that's another discussion down the road.
I would just make a comment, Councilman Diener, he was talking about the population allocation in the future. It's my understanding that the retreat that KRCC will be doing this year will focus on a process for distributing population growth in the future. It won't be actually doing it, but it will be providing alternatives, and the group can make some decisions about how they will distribute the population when it comes forward. So there will be an extensive work study on that, which should hold our interest, I believe.
Councilmember Lucarelli, you have something?
Yeah, I actually did. The height bonus for the grocery store, could that be done at 640 Bay Street? That, on that property, those properties, could there be a height bonus given if there was a grocery store in that extended property?
I have to go back and look at that section real quick.
My memory serves me right, it was 100 Bethel was where that,
Well, I
was
know that what we
proposed.
talked about, but I'm just wondering, with this in our code here, if that's gonna allow for something at that site or right down in that area.
I believe that that's part of the downtown Hyde overlay district, so yes, it would apply anywhere in the downtown Hyde overlay district, but I think there is a site that we had in mind for this, and with the MUP expiring, our goal is not to have to extend the MUP on top of this, because this implements a lot of what is in the mixed-use pilot program. And I guess I would suggest, what would be the benefit of having a grocery store that is even more conveniently located than the 100 Bethel site downtown? Is that worth the trade-off of the height, or is it not? But I don't have any objection to striking that as well, because I think, or more customizing it so that it's maybe in the gateways only, or
Incentivize it to be in a location other than a prime area like that, where height is already an issue. I find that problematic, actually, when I think about that. Maybe no one else does. I'm just bringing it up. When we're already talking about heights, and I saw a presentation today, and I was just kind of looking at the scale of everything, and I'm getting a little concerned when buildings are looking higher than City Hall, et cetera, and could even go higher if there was a height bonus.
Nick brings up a good point, though. The more walkable to a grocery store it is, the more viable it probably is.
We've got some really good walkable areas in our town. This is a very small area.
Wouldn't you have view protection, though, that also is added to that?
I don't think so. I don't think there's view protection in this particular,
Down Bay Street.
no, it could be pretty tall, and again, I'm concerned about light.
I think one way if you wanted to tweak this would be to say that the height bonus is only eligible in the downtown Hyde overlay district 5, which is already the sites that are not affecting views. We tried to put the 5-story limit in places that could better accommodate that. I don't think you would want it waterward of Bay Street, probably anywhere downtown.
Well, you
Yeah, I don't
wouldn't.
think you could.
Yeah, I think technically it's a challenge, but by putting it by granting the bonus only in the 5-story height area, you're already moving it into the sites that are make it easier to accommodate that height. But we could look at a totally different approach to that bonus as well if we wanted to strike it for now
I
and
just want to
rework
be
it.
really careful with that.
Yep, I understand the concern. I think that's a valid point that you raise.
Okay.
I guess, just to counter that a little bit, the benefit to the community for having a grocery store might be worth the extended height. I mean, if you want a more livable, the folks in Bremerton right now in downtown that live in downtown, that's the thing that they're crying for, is they want a grocery store in a walkable distance to their living unit, and that would keep them from getting into the car to drive, distances. So having a grocery store within walking of a viable living neighborhood would be an advantage.
Yeah, this already breaks it down into different areas, and we're just talking about, like he was saying, the gateway. It's a matter of 2 blocks. So it's that there's really 2 or 3 blocks that this doesn't make sense, and then there's many blocks right within walking distance that it does. So I'm just challenging.
You're just limiting the opportunities by
You can call
pushing
it that.
it blocks down the road.
You can call it that. You can call it that. But I have concerns because when I looked at the heights, the benefit of having that grocery store maybe just 2 blocks away from where you could have it, where it wouldn't affect it, I think that's going to make a huge difference in how much community wants to be down in an area because of light blocking and all of that. So I'm just asking.
I appreciate the impact to higher buildings, but would the benefit of having the groceries available there
2 blocks?
kind of outweigh the height? I mean, I guess I'm leaning more to the benefit of a grocery store than the impact of the height on a fairly limited amount of area.
Well, we have quite a few sites that it would work very well, and we discussed that, the 100 Bethel being one of them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the grocery store issue, I mean, even at 100 Bay Street, if you had a grocery store there and you have somebody living on the 640 Bay Street site, I bet they're going to drive most of the time to the grocery store, and that's going to require them to own a car. And so, there's a vehicle trip impact associated with it. I mean, I think, yes, this could potentially require more study, but in the absence of even having any projects right now, I mean, I think the alternative is leave it alone right now and continue to study it. Take it out right now and continue to study it. We could kick it to land use for a little bit more discussion and a possible amendment because they're meeting on Monday. But
I think what we saw in our DOD regulations, well, the intent was good. We were pretty restrictive, and some of our densities weren't even achievable. And as a result, we're almost 15 years down the road, and we haven't seen a single project.
Yeah.
I think for a period of time, I think we need to. I would encourage you to look, not be as restrictive, and as we start to see projects, continue to evaluate our code to make sure that we're getting what we want. I don't think we're going to get 10 projects at once. I think I think we're going to be lucky to get a project or 2 out of the gate in the next few years, and there's cycles to the economy, and one of our challenges too, back when we adopted the DOD, is we immediately went into an economic downturn that contributed to lack of projects. So I think we've got some exciting tools from the opportunity zones, and I think this code is another tool that we're putting in the toolbox, and I'm highly encouraged by maybe the opportunities.
Well, one of the goals that I heard you say up front in all of this effort was to promote various things. Can you read those goals again?
So I mean, there's a whole lot more in the whereas statements of the ordinance, but the ones I highlighted were protect and maintain existing single-family neighborhoods, increase housing diversity and new development, promote density to support pedestrian activity and transit, improve connectivity in Port Orchard, minimize housing costs and maximize housing options, support mixed-use development, and provide an attractive pedestrian scale downtown development. And those are summarizing what's in our comp plan.
by promoting a grocery store into downtown, you're gonna check more of those blocks of goals than you are.
Well, I'm not discouraging a grocery store. I'm asking about the height bonus.
No, I appreciate where you're going. I'm saying what you're suggesting is put additional restrictions on where they can go by 2 blocks down the road, you can do it down there. And I'm suggesting that whatever is encouraging residential development is probably worth the impact of 1 story. And by promoting that, you're going to check off more of those blocks of the goals that you're trying to accomplish. 2 different opinions.
You bet, you bet.
Yeah, just 2
I
different
think
opinions.
wherever it ends up, what I've heard, you know, from a boutique grocery store standpoint, we're looking at about 5,000 square feet. It's probably a parcel of land. You know, 640 Bay Street's 10,000 square feet. So we're looking at probably no more than 10,000 square feet that we're giving a bonus, of which 5,000 is gonna be a grocery store, what I'm hearing is the number that it could be. And once there's a grocery store, we're probably not gonna ever see, there isn't a need for 2 grocery stores downtown. There's probably, right now, there isn't a need for 1, but with the housing, increased housing, you know, as we've heard in Bremerton, people want to be able to walk out the door of your condominium or your apartment and walk to the market. Something more than 7-Eleven. Other comments, other questions for Mr. Bond?
I just want to compliment on the good work. I know this has been going on for a couple of years and has involved a lot of trips and traffic and sightseeing and consultations, and it's been a deliberate and well thought out process.
Yes.
As we've acknowledged, there's some things that we want to continue to work with land use and the planning commission on, the trees, and Mr. Bond mentioned 1 or 2 others too, that, you know, this isn't gonna be a stagnant process, so we're gonna continue to modify it.
To answer Nick's question, I would prefer to see this back to us the first meeting in March rather than next week.
Okay.
Next week is too soon.
You know, I mean, if we wanted to expedite it, I haven't read this yet.
It's only 600 pages,
I know. And I,
Are
400
are
actually.
you looking at an immediate effective date?
Well, I think that was the other item to discuss was, do you want, you know, there's at least 2 or 3 people that are excited about this coming in, and they're working on applications in anticipation of this, and so I think they'd like to see it as soon as possible. But at the same time, it's going to take us a little bit of time to adjust and to update some forms, and so it doesn't have to be immediate. I think we can accommodate an immediate effective date. I guess tonight, just based on the fact that there aren't a whole lot of changes proposed, I think we can start working on implementation in advance in anticipation of adoption. So we can do immediate, or 5 days after publication. So even if you adopted it at the March meeting, we're not going to be able to publish for a week and a half, and then it's 5 days after that Friday that we publish in the paper. So there's a 2-week delay anyway.
Mr. Clausen?
I just want to, I guess, echo comments about the job done on this. Is pretty impressive with all the meetings that were held and all the special interest groups that were contacted and participated in it, and the planning commission's effort and the testimony that was taken. I mean, that's really impressive, and I certainly want to compliment you for that extra effort that you did to try to get everybody involved in it.
Certainly can't get challenged on the public process, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Councilmember Chang?
2 things that I was especially happy to hear about was the comment that you told us about the variety of housing choices. And I liked your observations of seeing, you know, McMansions on small lots and apartments. And I think if this encourages other housing styles, that would be great. But I also really appreciate the thought that I heard from your comments on parking, because too often we don't have a very robust discussion on that topic. And I think it sounds like you've thought of things that could improve it. And so I commend you for that.
Other comments? So I'm hearing the first meeting in March. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, and I think the next item on the agenda, the idea is to bring those two items forward together, and so we should talk about the relationship between the two when we get to Mark's next item.
Okay, actually, next two items. All right, with that, we'll move on to our next next discussion item. The next one is a proposed street cut moratorium. Mr. Dorsey.
Yes, so this has been discussed at work study. It's been something that the city has been wanting to put forth for a number of years. I think the Tremont project was a bit of a catalyst to finally get this going. So the city has been working, Public Works and Planning and the city attorney on looking at what other jurisdictions have done, and so we've working with the existing municipal code framework, we've kind of developed a draft ordinance. So in your packet, you'll see that we do have a draft ordinance 00219, whereby we're amending 1204-020 and 2024-020 to insert language that provides for a street cut moratorium. You also have in the packet our city attorney's, the red lines which we've adopted, but there's still comments that I think before we bring this in a final form, I think Mike, who's here tonight, Mike Pleasant, Assistant City Engineer, and the city attorney, and Ian, I think we need to sit down one last time and make sure that we've addressed the city attorney's comments on waivers and things. And then also in the packet, you'll see a trench restoration detail. I want to make sure it's very clear that this isn't part of the moratorium ordinance. This is just showing that for what we're going to put in our handbook, which we're going to talk about next, that this is going to be an updated repair section. So for projects that don't fall under this moratorium, that we're even increasing our standards for just regular trenching. So I think at this point, this did go to land use. It was asked to come to work study for further discussion. And at this point, I guess we're looking for direction from council on how you want us to proceed. This is for a moratorium that's specific to newly paved streets, not existing streets. And so, again, staff still needs to get with the city attorney to satisfy, kind of some of her questions. I guess we're really looking at what next steps do you really want to see on this, or do you want us just to work with Sharon and then just bring this to a city council and look at adopting?
So really the nexus is this, we're building a brand new street on Tremont. We have done our best to identify every type of utility from gas lines, to upsized sewer lines, so that anybody that builds, the potential build out of those parcels along there, not the existing uses, that we won't have to cut the street up. Last thing we want to do is build this new roadway and put a utility cut in it. And so as we do complete overlays or build new streets, or a developer brings us a new street, we would like to avoid, wherever possible, not cutting those streets up for a period of time, because utility cuts are never the same once you trench across it. So, Councilmember Rosepippy?
I thought it was pretty comprehensive, and it does give you an out on E there, where it says, work deemed by the Public Works Director to be in the best interest of the city. So I thought it covered all the bases, and it's a good starting, good starting spot. So I didn't have any issues with it as it was written in Sharon's comments.
Mr. Clausen?
I think it's excellent. I think it's long overdue. If you drive around our city and if you look at the conditions of the road, you can see every cut that's been made in the asphalt.
Feel it.
And regardless of what they do, and I know that folks try very hard to compact it before they put the patch in, but every one of them is a inverted speed pump. So I think this is great. I like the restoration diagrams that you have to patch it. I think it's wonderful.
So, how do we get this list out to the development community or applicants, and how often is it updated?
The list of newly paved streets,
Uh-huh.
yeah, we haven't,
We don't have one yet.
No, I mean, once we adopt this.
The list is gonna be short, Tremont.
yeah, I mean,
We know when we're gonna pave a street and it's gonna, we'll add it to a list, or we'll know when we pave it. And
so I guess what I can say is, so, and Mike can jump in, I mean, we've participated in what the county does every year, where they have a meeting with all the utilities and the work that they have planned for the next year, and they coordinate things. A lot of that work, though, sometimes is literally this upcoming season. So we're gonna model notifications and use that group. You know, there's the dry utility group, the overhead utilities, power, phone, cable, gas. And then, you know, I mean, we're already doing it on, what's that, Orlando Horseman, where we're reaching out to all those utility companies and West End Utility District. We've done it to some degree with the Bethel Corridor. You know, we know that that's gonna be, you know, we have to decide as a city if we're gonna do a Schedule 74 on that, which
I don't think we are.
we'll
Well, county
drive-
wasn't because of the transmission mains.
it'll drive up the cost of that project. But, so we will establish a SOP, a policy or a procedure internally on timeframe, how far in advance. You know, the next paving projects we have, you know, we'll get this in place. We're doing everything we can right now. To a certain degree, that's a fair amount of our contingency has been spent on the Tremont project on going back and providing stubs, because that wasn't what the original project scope was. It was a road project, and it wasn't kind of providing these, does every parcel have a connection? But we looked at that and said, well, we don't want the road torn up. So we know that when we design the Pottery project and the Sydney project in-house, as part of that project, we're going to we'll have this in place. That will be a street that we'll reach out and make sure that any of those utilities get in advance, and everybody knows that there's gonna be a moratorium on it. So, the answer is we will follow Kitsap County as a guide, but we'll develop our own process, and we'll start establishing this list of new roads. We're not there yet, because again, as the mayor said, we don't have any.
There are some in McCormick communities.
Well,
But they're building all of the utilities out when they build that
Right.
subdivision.
Right, but, so we do need to create a list.
Councilmember Chang?
Have you considered a different term for this instead of the M word? Maybe something less charged, like street preservation, or?
It's a moratorium.
It's a very common term in the industry.
Yeah,
All right.
Same with, our ordinance is very similar to what you'll see.
The county
in our
does.
agency, so
Yeah.
we'll kind of stay with that term.
yeah, I think it needs to be, I know that we don't like that word, but I think in this particular case, there is uniformity in that.
The way the gas companies, they get it, they see this coming, and I'm guessing they're ready for it. It's a matter of us getting there, so. It's due.
For those
Comments or questions?
listening to that, that was Mike Pleasance from the back of the room.
And peanut gallery. All right, we ready to move on to the next item?
Go for it.
All right, we're on to our last discussion item. Discussion regarding the adoption of an ordinance, thereby creating new chapters 12.34, sections 13.04 and 13.06, adopting the 2019 Public Works Engineering Standards and Specifications. I've been bird dogging this for a while with you guys. I'm glad that it's done. Ian, hiring Ian is what has allowed us to get here, so.
I agree completely. Ian was a great, it took a while, but, and other than the fact that he's a cougar, I think that he's been a fantastic find for the city. I talked to him today, and he's very happy. He took this position, and so I think, you know, the city is very fortunate to have, I don't want to say a stable of millennials because I get in trouble when I use that term, but between, you know, Mike and Thomas and Ian and, you know, your Public Works Department, we have to really work on retention because you've got some really good people right now. So, and Ian's put in a lot of work. He's a very good designer. He comes from the private sector. He worked for Coghlan Porter Lundeen. He's immersed in this, had been. So it's not like somebody like me that had been disassociated with land use when I went to Port Ludlow for 6 years. I mean, he's been in it, so this is all fresh. And so he's been able to take that experience and really, you know, put his heart and soul into this. And so the document that we have right now, and I think Nick will agree, what we spent money on 4 or 5 years ago was very poor. It was trying to create the concept was good. We followed Covington, but we were trying to create a one-stop document that really muddled clear lines between land use, code, planning. This is just a refined back, stripped out version, which is, it's a handbook for developers for guidelines for the city's Public Works Department. The other thing that we did previously was we had adopted it by resolution. With the city attorney at the time said we should go that route. We found out from the next city attorney that that wasn't the way to do it because we couldn't basically compel anybody to do anything. So not only have we updated it, taken out a lot of the code superfluous things that are already covered in code, but with Nick's help, we've actually, you know, created sections where this will be adopted by ordinance so that it will be adopted consistent with what Nick's going to be doing on this, on his code update, so that there's consistency there. And so, yeah, I think, and Mike can speak more to any specifics on the handbook. He and Ian really carried the water on this one. So, you know, we were hoping to get this on the agenda next week, but now it sounds like we have a bit of a reprieve, or we can go ahead and adopt this.
Yeah, just to speak to the timing. So in chapter 20.100, the proposed subdivision standards, there are references back to this book, and it calls it the 2019 Public Works and Engineering Standards book. And so I don't want to adopt a reference to something until we've also adopted that particular book. The other thing that's included in this that is important is we have a chapter on small cell standards, and so we haven't changed any of the standards from what was previously discussed with the representatives from Verizon and Mobility. We sort of hashed out the aesthetic standards. We still haven't agreed on the permit process or the franchise agreement model, but I think based on the deadlines in the federal order, it's important to get these on the book and in our public works standards so that they apply to any improvements in our right-of-way and in our roadways. So this has that effect, and I don't know whether the timeline on the small cell dictates that we need to do this sooner or not. We should double check that in terms of our adoption timing. I'm more comfortable with references to a book that hasn't been adopted yet than I am to missing a small cell deadline.
Right.
So would it hurt anything to adopt this handbook ahead of the code?
I don't think there's a whole lot of harm. It's just going to be some temporary inconsistencies.
But it's better than what we have now, which is we really can't compel anybody to, because our other one's adopted by resolution. So if somebody wanted to really challenge it, they'd say, I don't have to do it, sidewalks, because you don't have a standard. So I really think that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we can bring this one back next week if it's ready to roll.
It's it's ready. I mean, so you received electronically the red line and the clean. I had a copy of the red line and the clean, and I was going to bring that up tonight, but then Cindy Palmer took it from me for some reason, and then she never gave it back, and I forgot to bring it up. I can have that available if you want to look at that at any time between now and next week. Otherwise,
Would you email that out to everybody?
well, everybody did get.
Who got
They
it?
did.
They got that last week. Everybody got a red line and a clean. The red line really just shows, I think, how much was removed. Is really, again, taking out code references and things that shouldn't have been there, public, community development type things. So we really stripped it down. We spent a lot of time on finalizing plans and specs for water, sewer, and storm. And then I'd say the biggest focus really was, we really changed the streets sections. We're now because we had TSI as a function of the Bethel corridor study. We issued them a change order to take a look at, the corridor more in depth, but we also had them look at how we identify the streets in the city so that somebody can go in now, where before it was very convoluted to go in and try to determine what half-street frontage improvement they may have. Now you go in and we've got maps in there that just say, you're on this street, this is what this is going to be. It's a collector D and this is your road section. So that was another effort that was really beneficial, was taking our transportation model and combining that with our road sections, and have our transportation engineer really develop what our road system looks like, and it's set. So then we don't have to worry about, do you have to do sidewalks, and we have this conversation.
The other thing that was deleted, for some reason, we took the McCormick Road standards from the development agreement and put them into our standards manual, which meant that, I think the question was, are they available to anyone? So we removed those because they're still part of the development agreement. And then we also...
And McCormick agreed.
Yeah, and McCormick was good with that. The other big change is that previously landscape strips in residential neighborhoods were optional. Those are now required, at least a 4-foot landscape strip, which also I think probably helps to encourage low-impact development, because if they're putting in landscaping, it's an opportunity to do some water quality treatment. And it also keeps you from having sidewalks that are lumpy. Every time you hit a driveway, they have to drop down, or like at Adazio, you have Filterra trees planted in the middle of the sidewalk. So,
Right, well, that had its own unique challenges.
All right, I think we've getting late and we're beating this to death. So it sounds like we're bringing this back in a week. And with that, we're done with our discussion items, and we'll move to council committee reports. Finance just met this evening. Mr. Clausen, do you have a report?
Yes, we did just meet this evening, and we got the financial picture from NOAA on 2018. And as far as the sales tax is concerned, we, other than the whole issue of converting from accrual to cash, we did very well on our sales tax receipts, and I think it was like 7.7% year-over-year increase, which was nice to finish up the year. On the real estate excise tax, we did pretty well on the receipts there as well. We had a bit of an anomaly in 2017 with the sale of a shopping center and an apartment complex, but beyond that, we did extremely well. All of our
A good anomaly. It was a
it was
large
a positive thing.
transaction.
In our general ledger, essentially all of our funds, there was no big surprises. We ended the year doing quite well. So that's why we were able to answer your question about the wastewater or
Water utility.
water and sewer, yes. We also talked about a process for, it's adopting a resolution that essentially says when we make an expenditure out of our ER fund, our equipment reserve fund, that if at a later date we decide to get a loan for that equipment, for example, we can reimburse the ER&R fund with the proceeds from the loan. So we need to have this approved in advance of any kind of a purchase of that nature, so that if we do move forward with any kind of a financing option, that we can put it back into our ER&R fund. So the committee was fine with moving that forward to the council for action and hopefully approval. And we did kind of a summary on the Tremont widening project, and there are a couple things that were basically they were shared with us regarding the project, and some issues with drainage around some landscaping, and we've yet to see the total numbers on the change order, but there will be a change order coming forward on the Tremont project. But other than that, I don't know if Mark is going to expound on the Tremont project, but it seems like other than the snow that we've just had, we're progressing well, and things are not any big surprises yet. So
The same soils that we couldn't use in the utility trenches don't seem to drain well either in the landscape islands, so we're gonna have to over excavate those and put some soil in, put some drain holes in the islands, and then there's one retaining wall too that's damming water into a yard, so we'll have to put a drain, like a French type drain around that, so.
and we've scheduled the next finance committee meeting for March 26th at 5:30 here at City Hall.
Economic Development Tourism, I don't know that you met.
We haven't, we will be meeting, I believe it's March 11th.
That's what we
And
had.
we will be, if we haven't already, extending an invitation to the Port of Bremerton to join us at the meeting. They have provided us with a letter regarding use of public restrooms during our festivals. And so we have invited them to come in and have a conversation about that so that we can truly understand their letter, because it may have a significant impact on the festivals that we have downtown. So anyway, we've invited them, and so that will be one of our agenda items.
Utilities?
Yes, our next meeting is February 27th at 9:30 a.m. That's on a Wednesday.
All right, see it there. And Sewer Advisory?
April 17th.
Okay. Land use?
February 25th, 9:30 at the DCD conference room.
I think that got moved here, didn't I see?
It's not here.
I wanted to ask for clarification on that. Is,
Calendar invite, it said it was right here in this room.
Fred said that.
Well, Fred said it.
Since then, Carrie sent the corrected.
yeah, I just want to verify that it's in DCD. I think the main reason to meet in DCD is that we have technology that's available that we don't have in this room. So I think the last meeting, we met here just because we had too many people, guests that were coming on a particular issue.
Okay, so by default, it's gonna be at DCD, unless we hear otherwise.
And Carrie sent a new invite out
Yeah,
this afternoon.
I just updated my calendar, so I didn't know that went out to anyone else. Just to remind me that was the date. I didn't know the location either.
Okay, well, it's always at DCD, it always has been, so,
Okay.
great,
Alright.
we're clear.
Lodging tax?
Nothing right now.
Okay. Chimes and lights.
Next week again, that's Wednesday, 3:30 p.m. here at City Hall.
Outside agencies, transit work study this morning, and we saw pictures of things that look like vessels, boats, instead of pictures of piles of steel that need to be assembled. So
Instead
the
of drawings on a piece of paper, there's
Yeah.
actually
The wa- I
reality
saw a
behind
picture
it.
of the waterman in the water. That's the new hybrid electric that'll serve between here and Bremerton, and has actually outdoor seating and 150 passenger capacity. So I think we're a couple months from seeing that in operation, and they weren't in the water, but the MV Reliance and the Lady Swift are the two high-speed ferries. They were on some pictures of those sitting on the production floor up at All-American Marines, so it's exciting. And Housing Kitsap, we saw some financial statements this morning. And that was a monumental moment for the Finance Committee. So I'm I'm not the chair any longer, but I am still on the Finance Committee. So that's what I have for outside agencies. Beck, you have anything to report from KRCC?
No, just that we're meeting, help me, that's the first Tuesday of the month at 10:15 at the Norm Dix Center. And it would be March 5th. And I know that we're going to have I've lost my train of thought. We have a couple of presentations that day. One from PSRC on Vision 2050, one on clean air, and one on the census. So we'll report after the meeting.
Okay. Mayor's report, I got a few things. I haven't seen you guys in a while, so I'm going to start off a hats off to Tony Lang, our Public Works foreman. Now let's set this last 2 weeks aside because I got this information prior to the snow event. So Tony had been doing an exceptional job in the last biennium managing overtime. And so he gave me information that showed from 2016 to 2017, he had reduced overtime hours by over 300 hours. Wow. And then again in 2018, he reduced them by another 325 hours. So those 600 and roughly 30 hours equated to $63,000, which is a lot of money.
Does that have anything to do with chimes and lights not hanging garlands?
It shouldn't have, because they would do that it's more call outs and managing who's going out, and Tony's just a lot more accountability for those overtime hours.
There's scheduling actually happening.
Yeah.
There's performance-based happening. There's just management of overtime in general, where overtime was just kind of this expectation. It's now when needed. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is it's actually work is being scheduled and managed.
So anyway.
And then, and then step system conversions helped, but that really was reflected earlier. So you kind of had that taken out of the equation about 3 years ago, and now just with this kind of more pro management, you're seeing the real long-term effects of it.
So probably not sustainable again this next year, because we probably got a few hours this last couple of weeks. But anyway, I just wanted to celebrate.
We can isolate the snow and ice out, and I think we'll be tracking the same.
So, and then my next items through the holidays. Before the holidays, I visit classrooms and did a bunch of second graders at oh my goodness, what's that elementary school out off of Sedgwick, Hidden Creek. And then I also do a Mock City Council meeting the last couple of years at Marcus Whitman. So just want to share. So these were I've got about 150 of them, but I'll just share a couple. So this is second graders. Dear Mr. Putansu, thanks for visiting our school today. I think it was nice for you to make a speech. I talked about Jedi, for the students to send Jedi a Christmas card to make him feel better. I'm going to make him one also. And then, after I shared, I did attend Jedi's service. He did pass away shortly after the holidays. Thank you, Mayor Potansu, with an O, for coming to Hidden Creek Elementary and learned that your boss is all the people who live in Port Orchard. I have another question. Will you come back again? And that was from Demi. So the second graders, it's just a free-for-all and question and answer, and some of the things they ask. So the seventh graders, I thought this is a card signed by all of the teachers And one of the teachers, this is, I really appreciate it. I want to thank you for coming out and speaking to our students. I know that my students had a great time. What a great way of bringing real world into the classroom. And that was by Sarah Pollock, one of the teachers. And then one of the students just wanted to say thank you for coming here, talking to us about Port Orchard. Before you came to Marcus Whitman, I never knew there were 4 types of government or how to spell your name. And then, dear Mayor Patoncio, I'd like to thank you for coming to our school, Marcus Whitman. My name is Bella Roberts. I'm the girl who role-played the mayor in the role-playing in first period. I did not know before that you came, as the mayor doesn't have a vote. I always thought that the mayor had the final vote. I also gave you guys a map about our proposed community service day. I've already got one typo that will get corrected, but I'm still trying to identify maybe a downtown project. I'll reach out to Kathleen. Kitsap Bank has expressed a desire to participate, so this is just more of a save the date, and these are the ideas that we're talking about. The heavy lift is going to be out at Van Z. Now that well project is done, we're going to spread 100 yards of topsoil, so we might have to get Public Works to help us spread those mounds a little bit, because I'm going to wheelbarrow that. Yeah, beaches.
The arrow was pointing in the wrong location for Van Z, but
Okay, that's a good catch too. And beach is spelled wrong. Yes, the time frame has been established, the date and time. It's April 27th at 8 a.m. Yep. My next, so I've met with, now that we're out doing right-of-way acquisitions on the pathway, next segment of the pathway, some of the I had a couple of residents from Perry come and visit me. They have some concerns about our concepts to this point have Jersey barrier, and so we're reevaluating that, and they had a suggestion of cable barrier. Ian and Mike are looking at whether or not a bioswale might be. We have to have a physical barrier to separate the pedestrians from the traffic. And so we're looking at different options and what will be acceptable to WashDOT. And I assured the residents of that area that we would have a town hall meeting for them when we get closer to designs, which is more than a year away. We have an affordable housing task force at KRCC. I am the one representative to that, and we meet at Transit about quarterly. We've had one meeting, and I'm supposed to ask for a second representative to join me.
That is right after the transit meeting, right?
It
No,
varies.
it's going to be, the next meeting is Thursday, March 21st.
So if somebody wants to, it's a daytime meeting. I twist Beck's arm a lot, and,
I gave them my name today,
okay, well, there we go.
but I will be very glad to take it back if someone else wants to do it.
All right, so there's that. So if somebody really wants that position, you can wrestle Beck for it, and she'll give it up pretty easy. I've been in Olympia a few different times. I went to the Mayor's Exchange. I've got a whole bunch of information that I won't go into tonight about the economic forecasts and so on and so forth. At a high level, the state's budget revenue is came in stronger than they anticipated, but there is also unanticipated expenses, in particular, a bow wave from the Cleary fix in particular, and healthcare costs that weren't anticipated. So they're $500 million over before you start on anything that the governor talked about. So there either need to be cuts to expenditures or additional revenue sources found to balance that budget. Beck and I spent an entire day on that Friday the 8th down in Olympia. Got back just in time for, at the end of the snowstorm. It was really snowing down Olympia that day. We had really good, the best thing about it was nobody came to Olympia that day because they were listening to the weather report. Beck and I went to Olympia. Normally when you go down to Olympia, you get 5 to 7 minutes and you're rushed out the door for the next meeting. There was nobody else waiting in the hallway. So we had actually 15-minute meetings at times with folks, and they went very well. You know, of course, there's no money, but we met with Representative Peterson, who's the vice chair of the capital budget. We met with Representative Young, from the 26th district, who is the assistant ranking minority member for transportation. We met with Representative Beth Doggio, Capital Budget Chair, and Representative Barkus, who's the ranking minority member for transportation, and Representative Fay, the House Transportation Chair. So we had really, really productive meetings. I'm going back down on the 25th. Beck has offered to join me. We're going to meet with Senator Randall and Representative Caldier that day, lunchtime-ish. The meetings have been set already. If anybody wants to join us, you're more than welcome to. It'll be, probably spend more time driving than we are going to be down there for the meetings. But as you know, the AWC Action Days were canceled due to the weather. There's a lobby day on March 25th, and the plan is to expand that lobby day to capture some of those activities that we didn't get to do on Action Days. See here. That's it, I guess. That's all I got. And directors, what do you got there, Mr. Dorsey?
One is, if you read the article in the Kitsap Sun about the state projects in the area, so we'll be starting that Mile Hill, basically from Kentucky Fried Chicken all the way up to Whittier, with a complete overlay, and then there's some ADA improvements. They're not doing sidewalks, but they're doing intersections. So at all the intersections, we'll have brand new improvements. So we'll get.
What about the roundabout?
The roundabout isn't in this package. The roundabout, I think, Mike's not here, but I think the roundabout's in 2022, 2023. So we do need to get, when that plan gets developed, get it to the property owners in there looking at redeveloping, because they need to know that that's changing. At Blackjack Creek, there's going to be a roundabout there instead of a signal. So that's going to be awesome. Rockwell, you'll notice that there's a big hole. So we've started digging, and so we're starting in on that project and already finding treasures. Just more concrete. I submitted to our lobbyists today the drafts of the $6 million asks for the Senate and the House for the SR 16-160 interchange. We'll see how that goes. And then as far as Tremont, we had an interesting meeting last week where we actually had Tucci, who's our paver. We were putting together the final lift paving plan. And so at this point, it looks like it's going to be 3 nights, 3 consecutive nights of closure. And there'll be 1 night where we actually will close the on-ramp and the off-ramp from Tremont at 16. So obviously that's going to take a lot of advanced coordination because this is like from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. So we'll have to get DOT's approval and get detours so that people will go down Sedgwick or come up Sunny Slope or whatever, because they won't be using the westbound off-ramp or the westbound on-ramp, because they'll need to close that so that we can get machines in and do that final lift. We also put a plan together for all the driveways from the sidewalk to the right-of-way or to the driveway reconstruction limit. There's a lot of effort in that because you have to make sure you don't pave anybody in, do half of one here and then go up the street and do half of another one, then come back. And So there's a lot of coordination on getting those driveways repaved. You will see at next week's council, I believe, maybe it's not at next one, but definitely in March. We've pushed through a number of change orders, that those will be coming forward. And so on that note, I have been working with trying to get additional Tremont money from DOT, PSRC, and the TIB. And so, because we know that we need to start generating some more funds. So I'm looking under every stone and to see if we can get some additional funding for that. So other than that, unless you got specific questions, I think that's it.
And the reason we want to pave that with the road closed is so we can get roundabouts paved that don't have any seams in them. It'll be one continuous pave.
Right. Yeah, otherwise, yeah, we end up with 3 or 4 seams in the circle itself, and we don't want that.
What month are you looking at?
Next week.
I would say summer.
Okay,
So the good news for you is school won't be in session.
that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, it'll be most likely it'll be June, July. Probably right during Fathers of Fun.
Stop. All right, we're moving on. Mr. Crocker, you got a software conversion. You want to talk about that?
I could if you'd like to.
Not at length.
Oh, okay. Actually, I was going to talk about 2 other things, and then I'll just give you a brief update on software conversion. 2 things I want to report back on are we've adopted some policies over the last few months, delegating more authority to the finance director to take certain actions. One of them was our AP authority that can release checks. I just want to report that we've actually used that multiple times already since December. One being the snow in that just occurred last week. We released checks, we followed our normal process and pushed them out, and here we are tonight approving those checks 1 week later, following our process. But again, that was because of the authority you bestowed upon us to be able to continue our business practices. So those policies are coming in and they are working. The other policy that we adopted was the utility waiver fee. And so we did reach back out to the original customer and waive their fees because they qualified for the program, and they were incredibly thankful. And then we've also received maybe 5 other requests since we instituted that policy that we were able to work with those customers as first-time offenders, quote offenders, or been late, and circumstances just came about. So both the utility clerks and the customers are really liking this new policy and authority that you guys have bestowed upon us. So thank you very much for those things. On the software update, we are working towards going live on payroll, and then we will follow up with our general ledger, and then ultimately utilities by May. So it's been a little setback due to the snowstorm. We had a week where we lost productivity of moving that software forward, but we're trying to catch back up. So I'm hoping to be sharing more with you next week as we kind of continue to move towards a path, because it's coming very quickly. February, March, we'll be live with our payroll and GL, and the last major hurdle will be our utility system. And so we are going to be starting to talk to our customers. We will put a flyer in the next mailer, in the next bill, just making them aware that changes will be coming. We're going to put something on the website that details out those changes and what to look for and what to expect. So we're going to start communicating over the next couple months with utility customers of the changes that are coming.
Wonderful. Mr. Bond, have you noticed the finance director to your right and how sharply he's dressed this evening?
Yes.
With that, you have a report for us?
I do. I passed out a traffic impact fee report, or a park and traffic impact fee report. I guess the bad news is that we spent all of our park impact fee money for the most part, and we're about to spend all of our traffic impact fee money on Tremont. We still have plenty of McCormick Woods traffic impact fee money, so this is just a requirement of our traffic impact fee code to provide a report at the end of the year, and 2018 was slightly delayed, but any questions about this information? Okay, the other comment I had, you'll see a comprehensive plan amendment docket here next week. I'm going to put that on the land use agenda. We only have city-initiated amendments proposed at this point, but we'll be asking to adopt that. And then finally, if with the zoning code being delayed until the first meeting of March, I have a planned vacation the first week of March, and so if you have questions, please Try to get those to me by the middle to end of next week. I'll be leaving on the 2nd of March for a week.
Sharon?
Nothing for me this evening, thank you.
Okay. Randy?
I have nothing either.
Wow. Well, thank you for indulging us and having a very long meeting this evening. And with that, our meeting is adjourned.